Welcome to the Wildcast, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Calvin Coyles, and I am joined by the beautiful Kelly Mackin. We're going to be going through so much today regarding workplace well-being, positive mental health, personal performance, workplace culture. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Motives Met is her brand, and she's been building it over the last couple of years, but it just recently launched, and effectively it's a skills finder / personality profiler for yourself in the workplace that allows you to understand how to be able to fulfill your highest and greatest motives and your primary needs at the highest level, so that you as an individual allow yourself to achieve personal performance, and obviously as an organization, us here at World Success, managing a group of people, can have a tremendous workplace culture as well. And we talk about this in our work, that the strategies that allow you to achieve success start with awareness. You need to know what's going to drive and motivate yourself and others in order to get the best out of them. I think this is an unbelievable tool. We're very excited to go through it, hence why we had Kelly today on the podcast. Kelly, welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Calvin. I've been looking forward to our conversation. So happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look, let's jump into it. Give me a bit of give me an overview of Motives Met, and then I want to hear a bit about the backstory and the research and how it all came to be. But give people at home a bit of an elevator pitch, if you will, for what is Motives Met.
Yeah. Well, really, Motives Met started with my mom and I, who's the other co-founder of our company, really dreaming of a better work world where we had real well-being, a work world where we could show up as human, right? Have emotions at work, and be vulnerable and be authentic with one another. And, relationships between companies and individuals that were really a two-way street. And to kind of have a compass to help guide us to go like, well, what's working in my work life? What's not? What do I need to change? And how can I understand myself better and the people I work with better so that we can bring out the best in each other at work? So, we kind of talked about this work world we dreamed of, but we didn't just want to talk about it. We really wanted to take action to create what we call the attainable dream of a work life well lived. And, there's such great momentum right now, encouragingly, around work wellness and how do we, reduce stress and burnout at work and have employee first cultures and have mental health and emotional health in our jobs and just overall be happy and healthy and satisfied at work, right? It's great we're talking about this stuff, but we were like, well, how do we really achieve it and not just talk about it? How do we measure well-being so we can improve it? How do we define it in a way that we can all get behind? So these are the burning questions we wanted to figure out. Essentially what creates well-being in our work lives and workplaces, or put the Motives Met way, what makes a work life well lived? And through all of our data and analysis, and there was quite a bit of it over the years, essentially we found that well-being at work is when people's motives are met. So it really comes down to the question, are your motives met? And then
the next question being, what are your motives, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's and motives, just to give that context, motives are your psychological, emotional, and social needs at work, those deep needs that are at the heart of your work well-being and your ability to thrive. So from our research, we found 28 different motives. Wow. For example, there's the community motive, which is the need to, have more meaningful connection and belonging with people at work. Right. Or the free expression motive, the need to be able to be heard, right? And not afraid to express freely at work with having consequences. So there's the fun motive, company appreciation, work-life balance, purpose, passion, 28 of these different motives that fall into 10 bigger overarching domains. So for example, the free expression motive is part of the freedom domain, along with flexibility and autonomy. And if you go to our website, we have this really cool framework called the Motive Circumplex, and it makes it really easy to grasp. You can see where all the motives kind of fall in relation to one another around this wheel, if you will. Yeah. So it makes it much, very easy to grasp kind of this whole framework.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, totally. So, essentially, we can all need these things or some of these things to be well at work, but we don't need them to the same degree or in the same way. So, the question becomes, what are those motives and can I keep them healthy, right? Because what our research found is when your top 5 of these 28 motives are met, you thrive. When those motives are healthy, you can be healthy. But those motives are going to be different for everybody. And as you said, Calvin, we have to have awareness first and foremost before we can meet them to go, okay, what is most important to me right now in this season of my work life, or for the people who I work with or the people I manage. So because of that finding, we created a data-based assessment tool. So you take the Motives Met survey. It's about 20 minutes. It's pretty quick and easy to take. And when you take it, you uncover your top 5 motives that you need met to have that greatest well-being. And in your profile, we give you a ton of information to help you meet those motives. So you get a work wellness check-in and tips to manage or work with people and how to create your motive story, because we all have a different story behind our motives.
Yeah.
So, the assessment really empowers people and companies and leaders to first become aware of these motives, right? To be able to understand them better, accept motive diversity, communicate them, because they're often really a missing conversation we don't talk about at work, measure them, and then ultimately meet the motives. So that's just high level background.
Yeah. Wow. I'm going to share this for the people that are watching the video version of this as well. Kelly, this is great, by the way. The branding on this is fucking unbelievable. I love it.
Thank you.
I love the symbols. I love it how it's all put together as well. And just looking through these now, you realize, one, it makes sense to me, having managed and led people. And of course, we've got 200,000 clients in 83 countries. So I can, say qualitative, not quantitative, but qualitatively, that these are transcendent across all of our experience of working with people. And there's definitely just some of these that I can spotlight that I can see quite quickly. We do pretty well here. And there's other things as well that I can see would be not so easy at Wild Success as well. So really interesting to see that as well. What are the ones that you see straight off the bat that you go, companies tend to do these pretty well just by default? Like that's part of our sort of lexicon in terms of workplace culture and awareness. Like, most companies, not everybody, of course, there's some people that's still quite archaic, but most companies today seem to get these done pretty well. And then there's these other ones that most people are really, losing. And people, as a result of that, are leaving great organizations just because simply they're not meeting these key motives. Is there any that you find in the data that are, I guess, underrepresented or undersupported?
Well, there's definitely, in a great way, in the past few years, motives like flexibility and work-life balance are becoming so much more important at work. And companies and leaders are starting to get that to keep their good people, right? They have to meet these motives, or they are going to leave. Right now we're going through the great resignation, right? People during COVID, they had a chance to see what it was like to be home at dinner, if they had an unmet work-life balance motive or whatever it may be. So, different companies and different leaders kind of, it can be all over the board of where they're strong and kind of where they're weak. But what's really great is they get to start kind of talking about this stuff and going, well, why are we weak, right? Hey, a lot of people have the community motive. And now that we're all going more remote, this seems to be kind of slipping. How can we kind of, as a team, think about what we can do to help strengthen this? So the best part is it gets out in the open, whether you're strong and it's like, hey, let's celebrate this. Let's talk about it as part of our culture. Or, hey, we need to do a better job. At least it's getting it out in the open so that it can be improved or maintained, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. This is going quite in an interesting direction for me in my head about a question I want to ask, but we need to come back to some other stuff later as well. So I imagine in an ideal environment, right? Let's say we've got 13 staff here at Wild Success. We'll just use us here as a case study for you. And so you have 13 staff. We get those staff members to complete the scorecard. And we come back with a completely a beautiful mix of all these different motives. So we go, great. For Jade, you require a higher level of flexibility, right? So that's one of your key motives. Great. So we're going to give you flexible time. You can come and go as you like, as long as you get your job done, right? But for someone like maybe, for example, Suze, you need a higher level of community and peer support and fun and manager support. That, personal connections are a stronger motive for you. So, you can be in the office. I'm going to give you more quality time and connection as part of that, right? So both staff members, just to use the example, are both getting their motives met. But as a result of that, we're treating one staff member different than the other, and we're treating them based off their individual motives, right? So I'm interested to get your perspective on something, because that conversation, that makes sense to me. Going, great, everyone, don't treat people the way that you wish to be treated. Treat people the way that they wish to be treated. And if we can fulfill their motives and their needs, then everybody wins. That's difficult though in a company. Obviously, we're a small company at 13 staff. You have big companies at 2, 3, 5, 10,000, 100,000, etc. How do you create an environment where there is that sort of, everyone's equal, right? Especially when equality today, particularly equality of outcome, is becoming increasingly a debated topic, right? In terms of, someone in the office is taking up different resources than someone that's not in the office. Someone that's in the Philippines takes up different resources than somebody who's in California. So how do you have that conversation and frame it in a way which is, hey, we're meeting everyone's individual motives. And as a result of us meeting your individual motives, you might therefore achieve different results than what somebody else might, and they'll be compensated differently. But that, do you understand where I'm sort of hedging that conversation? You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, totally. I think that's actually a really big strength that our tool has. It kind of dispels some of the myths that are out there, is this idea that a one size fits all approach doesn't really work, that you have to have individualized consideration.
Yes.
And when you use it as leaders or, in your company or as part of your, your company culture, you're telling people we care about your well-being. So we are going to try to not treat everybody the same, right? And even at a big company, it's about, okay, well, what about the people who work closely together? Do they really understand what they each need and how they're different and how they're motivated different? As a manager, do you understand it? Especially because someone's motives can rise to the top because, well, for all sorts of different reasons. It can be tied to your values, but it could also rise to the top because it's not doing so hot. Like, this is just barely surviving. So it's a stronger need for me right now. So as a manager, you're going to become privy to problems that are out there. And given, a lot of leaders and managers do only have so much time, right? And even coworkers working with each other so much time, it helps us focus our attention with intention, right? A very mindful tool to become consciously aware of what's most important. And to honestly, sometimes helping meet a motive is just respecting that we're different.
Yeah, very true. Talk to me, Kelly, about the shared responsibility that individuals have and companies have. Now, I think about our business as a family in many ways, primarily because we're a family-run business. My wife and I run the company. I've got my brother-in-law, I've got my aunt working with us as well. We've had other family members in the past. So we have this very much a family culture, right? And so if I think about a relationship with your spouse, for example, there's there definitely can be in our culture a sort of tendency that your spouse is responsible for making you happy. And sort of my wife and I are sort of, connecting with the belief system. No, it's my responsibility to make me happy. It's her responsibility to make her happy. And of course, we also take extreme ownership and responsibility for each other as well. But it starts internally, right? So from an individual's perspective, what do you think the line is in the organization where it's like, hey, it's our job as a company to provide an environment where you can thrive, but it's your job as an individual to know what your motives are, and as a result of that, to be able to sort of pick and choose at a macro level a company that's going to work with you. But if you're here, where does it take two hands to clap? Where does that line of responsibility really come from?
That's a great question. I mean, part of our philosophy and our work-life well-lived principles, as we call them, and developing a motive mindset is that we all co-create work wellness, right? We are all interconnected and interdependent at work. So it's a win for everybody to kind of help support motives and be aware of them. But part of meeting motives, a big part of meeting motives, comes from the individual. And that's why in your profile, we give you a lot of good questions, a lot of good things to think about. Well, hey, if you have the work-life balance motive and you don't feel it's being met, are you setting any boundaries? Have you communicated them, right? What have you done? Do you honor your own boundaries, right? Do you have things in place? But then if you're a coworker, for example, and someone puts up a boundary, do you respect it, right? So their ability to meet that motive to the fullest is going to take other people there, right? Or at the very least, someone on our team said, hey, I get we can't move this deadline, but I really appreciated that you came to me and said, I know you have the work-life balance motive. I know you've been compromising it lately. We're going to give you extra time when we get through this deadline. We appreciate you compromising this. And she said, just to be understood and have someone go, wow, that's great. So it's a mixture of things, but absolutely responsibility falls on the individual. But using the assessment, it makes us self-reflect and have conversations with ourselves and have even confrontations of, okay, the achievement motive. am I clear on how I define achievement? Do I celebrate my wins? So it is a group effort, but it's very much also on the individual.
Yeah, 100%. I think it also gives us some really fantastic topics of conversation, right? Like just looking at one of them with regards to freedom here, around flexibility and autonomy and free expression. That's going to translate to people. Those three words have multiple meanings, right? For different people, right? So, free expression can be, I want to be able to freely express myself in the workplace, in team meetings, but it can also be, I want free expression in how I dress and how I show up. There's a variety of interpretations around that. So I think what it does, and what you've done really well in this model, from what I can see here, is one, you've given people an easy shortcut, but you've also created now a dynamic where there's 28 different topics of conversation. And obviously you wouldn't need to necessarily discuss all 28 depending on the size of your organization. But if you identify, hey, across all of your team, of the 28, there are, say, 12 that profile really highly in your team, then you can then go through the process like you would as a company with shared values. You can go through that with sort of shared motives and say, hey, what do these individually mean? So that when I say work-life balance and you say work-life balance, it's not just, hey, we're talking about work-life balance, we're talking about our individual interpretations, and then we can create a shared interpretation as part of that as well. Is that encouraged when you've got companies that are going through that to be able to take the language? Or I imagine in the same way that you've sort of set a definition or a narrative around what like a work-life well-lived is and work-life balance is, I imagine you've also then sort of set pre-descriptives of each of those different areas. Is that, am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, no, totally. You're spot on. I mean, we give a summary of each of the motives, but it's pretty short. Part of talking about motives is developing your motive story. We give you prompts for that, but it's, what does a motive mean to you? Because to your point, Calvin, the same people can have the exact same motive, but how it gets met or the obstacles to better meeting it or what it means to them is going to be different. Even work-life balance we have in the description. For you, it could be more about work-life separation. Hey, I need to be able to turn work on and off. For some people, work-life balance is more about work-life integration. Work and life just really seamlessly vibe and kind of work together. And I just have a lot of flexibility that helps me do it. So talking about it is a huge part of it, right? It's super helpful just to know each other's motives, but then it becomes, tell me your story. Why is that important? What does it mean to you? And for a company, like you just said, it's great when, they use the assessment. We do workshops with companies, and we even give them a workshop guide if they want to do their own. So you kind of sit there and talk about the different motives and what are the builders to this? What are the blockers? And how is it different for different people on the team? So you can kind of work through them together. Like, hey, there are 5 motives here that we all have in common. Let's talk about them. We're 2 motives that don't seem to be doing so hot. Let's talk about why they're not doing so hot.
Yeah, I love it. In our work, Kelly, we talk about 7 human needs. And in those, and I imagine there's a lot of overlap in that. And you might be familiar with a TED talk that Tony Robbins did many years ago around like the 6 primary drivers of the human experience. We say there's 7, but effectively it's the same. We just split love and connection out. So for us, it's certainty and variety, connection and significance, and then growth, love, and contribution, right? So that's what we say are these sort of universals. And there are 4 that everyone has to meet, and then there's 3 that if you get them, they'll allow you to achieve a higher level. And these tend to be quite well set for people, right? Some people are just more naturally governed towards certainty than they are variety. Some people are more naturally governed towards significance rather than connection. But of course, there's going to be different times where certain things flag, like certain life changes. I'm a couple of weeks away from having my first child. So that's going to change quite a lot of stuff, right, for us. My question for you is with regards to these motives, for me, when I think of motivation, I think of motivation or my motive for doing something that springs from my values. So if I think about my highest values, if I'm acting in alignment with them, I'm going to be tremendously motivated to do something. And if I'm not in line with them, I'm not going to be motivated to do that. So in the research, did you find that these motives were sort of nestled in a bedrock of human values, or are they more nestled in perhaps personal preferences at a certain time, or is it a combination of both?
Yes, motives can change. So that was a really important part of the data, is that they don't change rapidly from day to day, but as things in your personal life change, congratulations on
Thank
having
you.
your kid. It's so exciting. But as you get a promotion or a new job or something big happens in your personal life, or you have a new goal, like these things are going to influence your motives, but they also can be tied to our values.
Yeah.
So my motives are flexibility, autonomy, future success, achievement, and security. Now, I did the research, I helped build the algorithm, but even I didn't know what my five would be until I took it.
Right.
Now, I guessed flexibility and autonomy because those two are so deeply tied to my values. They're in the
Gotcha.
freedom domain, and that's just kind of who I am. But my other three motives, I didn't necessarily guess. And for me, those are much more tied to this season of my work life. So I anticipate that those motives will change over time.
Yeah. What is that time frame? So as an organization, should we be looking to do this on a 90-day cycle, a 6-month, 12-month cycle? Like how frequently would you have teams and companies review these to make sure they're still current for the people in their team?
We recommend once a year.
Okay.
That seems to be, kind of the sweet spot of,
Right.
enough time passing. And even on our team, we found that most of us had a few motives that again stayed the same. They're kind of our values, our bed, or we call them deal breaker motives, stuff, like, hey, if this isn't met, I am not going to be doing well at work. It's
Right.
kind of a number one thing. But then we all had a few that had kind of changed over time too. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting to see what those are. And to, it
Yeah.
helps you understand the people you work with so much better to understand that
Of course.
about them too.
Of course. Talk me through the quant of all of this and the research around, how do you put together the sample size? What was your approach to that? Obviously these, for want of a better word, personality profiling tools are obviously fantastic. And one of the things that you can do with them, obviously, is that the more data you get, the more comprehensive it gets, right? So as a starting point, though, you've done a couple of years now of research and pulling it all together. What was your approach to that? What's your methodology behind that as well? How you came up with these in terms of these keywords? Like, what was that reference point?
Well, we did a lot of R&D research over about a 3-year period. And so where we started was a little bit more qualitative and just kind of getting to understand people just talking as if they were talking to a person. What do you really feel you need to be happy at work? Or what do you need to kind of have your mental health be well? And so we took all of that great information and then we started to do quantitative research and just go out time and time again and really just refine it till we got to a place where it felt like these 28 are really seeming to be the bedrock. Of course, people might find other things that they also find important in their work life to be happy, of course, but these really seemed like the foundational pieces that, people would have top 5 out of those that they were like, hey, this is really what I need to be happy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Excellent. Why 28?
That's just what the data told us.
Right.
So that's the great thing about being we went in really curious. We tested more than 28. And then we played with, 20 and then but that was just the sweet spot from doing, factor analysis and just pouring over data and more data and more data. That's just kind of what surfaced. And then, the data also with that visual you just showed everyone, the data actually broke the motives into those domains.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's interesting, like the achievement motive is in the success domain and the future success motive is actually in the advancement domain.
Right.
Because it was interesting. A lot of people who want future success and really need that to feel well at work, they also need growth and challenge. So the data really informed every part of the tool.
That's super interesting. I really like that. Is there a sense, and I haven't done the test yet, but I'm excited to do it. Is there a sense of going, hey, these are my these are my desires and these are my drivers at work and my motives? And how much is there a sense of like, hey, these are my top 5 desires, and then there's a score of how much your current place of business is meeting that? So like, do you score that then to go, hey, if my highest value is free expression, but is that currently like a 3 out of 10 for me in my current workplace? Do you have the data of how much people feel as though their current workplace is meeting their highest desires?
Yes, we do ask at the end of the assessment, how well do you think, now that you've kind of done this and seen all the information, how well do you feel your motives are being met?
Right.
And that's really what, where the research took us, of people who felt like that they were happy at work, that they were fulfilled, that they were motivated and doing well, is when their scores out of 10 were 7, 8, 9, 10.
Gotcha.
When they were in the 2, 3, 4, their motives were not doing so good.
Yeah, sure.
And then as companies, after people take the assessment, so we're working with a consultancy now, and they just sent out a survey saying, okay, so which motive of yours needs the most improvement and why? And how would you score each of these 5? And we asked that in your assessment results too. Now that we've given you all these questions to reflect on and how to diagnose the health of your motives, where do you think they fall, and how do you feel about that, and what needs to change? So really starting to get at being able to measure these things, right? Because what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
a really important part of the process, for
Yeah.
sure.
Tell me, you might not have this data, but you might. I think you probably do. What's the number out of 10 from a qualitative perspective? Once I've identified my motives, what number out of 10 represents happiness and motivation, right? And what number out of 10 represents like quite a, I was going to say frustration, but I imagine you can be frustrated at any level, but like the sort of frustration where you're contemplating leaving your job, for example. Like it might be 7.3 out of 10 in your score goes, okay, well, I'm motivated and I'm doing really well. Anything above that is a bonus, but that's the sort of threshold for I'm doing well. And then under at 2.6 is this place is shit. I'm looking for another job. And I don't know, obviously it's quite fresh, right? But I don't know if you have that data, but I'd be interested to hear if you did.
Well, we definitely found that if it was 5 or under for your motives, that people actually said they were more likely to be looking for a job, and or if they got a decent job offer tomorrow, they'd be way more likely to leave.
They'd be taking it. Wow, under 5.
So that was really clear, the under 5. But
wow.
On an individual level, it's a great question you ask, because once you go through all the information, you kind of have to take a step back and look at your motives holistically. You might not need them all met out of 10, right? Or you might need to go, hey, I'm willing to compromise this motive right now so that these motives can do well, but I'm going to keep this motive in mind, right? I don't want this motive to maybe go too low. So, there isn't necessarily a perfect, oh, you want to get a 10 out of 10. I have the security motive. And I don't want it to be a 10 out of 10, because if I'm too comfy and secure in my work life, then I am not taking the risks. I am not out of my comfort zone, which I need to do to achieve, right? And have the future success I want. So it's interesting. Once you take a step back, you can assess then where your well-being's at when you look at all your motives together.
Yeah, right. Excellent. Okay, just great to know. Fantastic. I love it. Nice. What do you think? And obviously, it's probably building on the question I just asked you, but you talk a little bit about, in this culture that we have around stress and around burnout and around workplace fatigue. And, obviously, you just talked about earlier about this sort of the great resignation, right? People have gone, hold on, there's a different world out there than what I had originally anticipated. And now I've tasted this. I don't want to keep dining in that old restaurant anymore. What do you think are some of the things that organizations, need to put in place to avoid workplace burnout? And from an individual level, what do you think are some of those trigger factors that people can be self-conscious of to avoid themselves, falling into that trap?
Well, it's, I kind of mentioned that work well-being's having a moment, which is great. But a lot of companies are kind of putting a Band-Aid on things instead of getting to the root problem, right? And I mean, hey, I'm a meditation teacher, so I love meditation apps and free yoga classes and take an extra PTO day and have a self-care day, and all these things are lovely. But if people's motives aren't met, they just don't matter.
Yeah.
A definition of stress I love that actually comes from my meditation teacher, David G, is that stress is how we respond when our needs aren't met. So our motives are our deepest needs we have. So if I have the work-life balance motive and I have zero work-life balance, you can give me all the stress management techniques you want, but that stressor is not healthy. So it kind of, when you use motives met, that's what really helps you to reduce burnout and stress in a more lasting way, because you're saying, let's look at your stressors, which are your top 5 motives, and what do we need to do about those stressors? Instead of just saying, hey, I have the calmness motive, and this is a very stressful environment where people are always running around and always very serious and always very intense. And, there's just no way I'm going to get, this motive met by me sitting there and doing breathing exercises at my desk, right? So just using this tool and really caring, having companies care about these motives being in a good place is what creates that lasting change for stress and burnout in your workplace.
Do you think that there's a element, let's talk about stress, do you think there's an element where companies need to create a dynamic that is, I'm going to use the word stable, right? Not necessarily certain, but stable in order for people to have their needs met. So if you think about like Maslow's hierarchy, for example, right? If we don't feel as though we're going to survive, then self-actualization is really not that significant, right? So in a workplace environment, with COVID and everything that's been happening recently, there's a lot of people that can't get past the reality of, are we still going to be in business in a couple of months' time? And there's a concern of, layoffs and retrenchments and redundancies and all the other stuff that's going on. Or maybe they're working from home, and so they don't get that same sense of connectedness in the organizations. Like a lot of that social fabric has started to unravel a little bit because everyone's digital. Do you think there's an importance as an organization to be able to set that foundational element first before we even look at setting somebody's motives for thriving and succeeding? Is there got to be that foundation of just, hey, this is the sort of status quo, and now we can then grow beyond that? Because sometimes if we have too much change, people don't know which way is up or down or left or right. Does that make sense, what I'm sort of asking there?
Yeah, I think so. There are best practices. Maybe this is what you're getting at a little bit. And we include these again in your results of like, hey, there are just some general things that we should be doing, to help if someone has the pure connection motive or the variety motive. And just, if you're a workplace, right, the thing is you need to care about all these motives, right? Even though we need to look at them on an individual level, we cannot play favorites when it comes to motives. They are all valid and equal and important and worthy. Yeah. So there are absolutely kind of baseline things. Hey, if someone has the fairness motive, is there discrimination in our workplace? Like, let's make sure we're looking at this really key underlying important stuff. And then of course you can kind of step into, well, how can we thrive? What are creative ways that we can create more of a community? But you kind of can't get there until you deal with, hey, if there's a lot of gossip at our job, no way we're going to be able to have community, right? So before we can even talk about these ways to elevate motives, sometimes it's dealing with those kind of blockers, those obstacles that are in the way of them ever getting elevated to begin with. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's fantastic. I love it. What do you think is one, and this is a complete generalization, but what do you think is one thing that organizations need to stop doing that would create a better or more holistic environment for workplace well-being? And then also, what's one thing that workplaces can start doing more of? Obviously, other than taking the test, they'll all go and do that. But what's one thing that they can start to do, and what's one thing they need to stop doing that if they just shift the balance on those two scales would have a disproportionate impact?
Well, one would probably be one thing that they need to stop doing is judging motives, because there's still a lot of organizations, cultures, teams, and even personally, whether we like to admit it or not, we can kind of judge people's motives. We think, hey, this is what I think is important. And that's what they should think is most important, right? To be happy at work. How come they don't, how come we're not on the same page? So accepting motive diversity is a big one, because certain motives can kind of get put on a pedestal, right? There'll be a TED talk and books that say, you must have this, you need to have growth. If you don't have community, you don't have a good team. And then other motives can be judged, dismissed, misunderstood. And so I'd say that that's a really big thing in terms of what you need to stop doing and what you need to start doing, is just accepting and respecting that we're all different and we all have different motives that we need met to be well at work, and everybody deserves to have them met. And of course they're going to change. So that's a big mindset shift. That's part of building the motive mindset that we talk about, that if companies can do that, they're already going to see a big shift.
Nice. And I guess there's a start and a stop in there, right? Isn't there? There's starting accepting the diversity in that, and then stop judging the motives of being different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. Fantastic. One final question for you. We're in a place globally which is real flux at the moment. And especially with regards to what the concept of working is, right? It's really taking a big shakeup, which For some people, it was like, we've already been working like this for a long time, so I can't believe everyone's just coming to the party. But there's a lot of other companies out there that have been quite entrenched in, this is the way that we've always done things, this is the way we're going to do things. And I think one of the things this pandemic has taught us is actually we can still do a lot of stuff that we didn't think that we could do previously. Now we can do things in a far more flexible way and still get good stuff done. But it has created some first, second, third order consequences. I was listening to a podcast just recently with Joe Rogan, and I forget the other gentleman's name. I think it was Ramit Seth. I can't remember his name. Anyway, quite an interesting guy, tech entrepreneur from the United States. And he was talking about this concept and this idea that effectively what his version of the future for workplace was that everyone effectively would go back to becoming sort of independent contractors, and we would have this sort of scaled gig economy. So rather than having, for example, a law firm with a group of lawyers that you go and hire as a company, you would have all of these individual lawyers out there effectively running their own show, and that you would bring people on board for a project, and you'd get them very similar to say how Hollywood works today, where you'd have a script, you'd pull a team of people together to work on that project, and then everyone would go off and do other projects together. They might take a bit of time off, they might not. And so that was his sort of concept and idea that that's where we're headed as an organization, or as a culture, not an organization. I'm interested to know what you think the short and long-term horizon looks like for workplace well-being and culture. You see companies on the very forefront of that, or at least they brand themselves to be on the forefront of that. The Googles and the Facebooks in Silicon Valley around workplace well-being and culture, but that's not all sunshine and rainbows. And then you've got, very older school organizations as well that are very entrenched in, tradition. So I'm interested to see what your thoughts are with regards to the pandemic, of what you think the next 5 to 10 years looks like for workplaces and well-being and the way that things happen. And if you see there's going to be really any big major tectonic shifts that will continue after this pandemic is all over. Knock on wood that actually happens.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting thing to think about. I mean, I think the world is obviously shifting more that way. And when we talk to companies, that's what they talk about, of going, hey, this is a changing landscape. And especially coming out of COVID, we just had all these different changes that we were up against that we knew were coming, but they came a lot quicker. A lot of companies needed to adapt to new technology and remote work and all these things, right, that have been trending for the future, but they had to do it a lot sooner. So, I think companies are trying to adapt to be able to do that better, because I do think part of that will be the future. A lot of people have left traditional corporate America to start their own companies, work in smaller teams, be part of, we work with a consultancy where they all left a big consultancy and they're under one brand saying, hey, we all work together, but we're all independent. So right. I think there's a trend there. But there are some traditional ways of working that, as we've talked to people about the changing landscape of work, they miss. Like you said, some of the social aspects, right? And just being in the same room with people. Yeah. So, they're also trying to figure out how to keep some of those traditional ways of working that people still crave, but also allowing for this new way of working that people want. And it can be a fine line walking that way. So I think we're going to see some of both. I think we're going to see keeping some of the traditional ways of working, but perhaps looking different. Like a lot of companies are now doing bigger group offsites with their teams a few times a year, knowing that they're not going to have an office anymore where everybody sees each other, but going, hey, this human connection is still really important for a lot of people. So it's going to look a little different, but they're kind of trying to still keep that need that people, have a deep desire for, to be well at work. They're still trying to honor that in new creative ways. So it will be interesting to see, as this all unfolds, as we, like you said, hopefully get through the pandemic. It will be interesting.
Yeah, fantastic. I love it. This has been an unbelievable conversation. I can't wait to do the test. I'm going to get my whole team to do it. We've got a team meeting a little bit later on today, so I'm going to get them all to do it beforehand, and they can share their results when we come to the team chat as well. And then once we've got that as well, I'll circle back to you and give you a bit of an update on how we went with the conversation as well, and then what we're going to put in place as well. So you can use a bit of a case study over here in Australia. Kelly, where do we find out more about you, and more importantly as well, how do we jump in and do the test, and what does that look like? What's the links for that? And then I can put all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, you just go to motivesmat.com. It's super easy. You just purchase a code and then you can start the assessment right there. It takes about 20 minutes. You answer some questions and then you automatically get your whole profile. And of course, everything gets emailed to you as well, but it's super easy, and companies can also purchase it for their company right on the site. But they can also reach out if they kind of want help setting up their dashboard or doing a workshop or those type of things as well.
That's unbelievable. Excellent. I can't wait. Well, I'll put all the links in the notes as well. I want to say thank you so much for your time today. And I really appreciate the conversation, and I can't wait to do the test. And, credit to you and your team for putting together something that I think is really needed, and certainly something that I think is going to be very impactful for a lot of businesses out there. Everything that I've seen about it looks unbelievable. So we can't wait to do it.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Calvin. This was wonderful. It was great talking to you.
No problems at all. Ladies and gentlemen, for everyone that's watching online or listening to us via the podcast app, please leave us a like, a comment, and a review. Go and check out Kelly's stuff, of course. Go and get your motives assessment completed. And until we see you live or online, be bold, have fun, go make an impact in the world, and we'll see you on the wild side.